As Texas entered into the 20th century, a new industry would emerge that would come to dominate the Texas economy. This is the oil industry. Also known as Texas Gold, Texas is the leader in oil production in the United States and one of the leaders in the world. And this industry did not exist before the 20th century. The first Texas oil field occurred in 1866 when a man by the name of Lynn T. Barrett will drill an oil well in East Texas at a place that will become known as Oil Springs because of the amount of oil. Here the oil is sort of right under the ground. It was rather easy to reach. By 1890, Barrett will have 40 oil wells in East Texas and a pipeline going to Nacogdoches. This is going to lead others to look to make money off of the oil industry. And the first major field is the Corsicana field in 1894. A company drilling for water, drilling to establish a water well in Corsicana, will struck oil. By 1900, there will be 290 wells producing 840,000 barrels of oil a year in the Corsicana field. And as the oil industry grows, other industries connected to it will also grow. One of these is started by a man by the name of Joseph S. Cullinan, and he is going to build the first oil refinery in Texas and the first oil refinery west of the Mississippi River. And the oil refinery then takes that oil and turns it into products like gasoline, kerosene, things like that. With the Corsicana field, it brings in Texas history, what we refer to as the Age of Oil, which is going to last from 1894 to 1935. The big start, the main real start of the Texas oil industry, though, occurs in 1901 with what's known as the Spindletop Gusher. Located near Beaumont, Texas, on January 10th, 1901, a drill team who is drilling for oil is going to reach a depth of 1,139 feet. This is a new depth record. Most oil wells were not that deep. And all of a sudden, drilling pipes start shooting out of the ground from the pressure underneath it. This is followed by mud that they had used to pack the drill well with, and then oil and natural gas starts shooting out. It was under so much pressure, the oil will gush 100 feet in the air for 9 days until they were able to cap the well. Once it's capped and starts producing, Spindletop will produce 75,000 barrels of oil a day. More oil wells will be drilled in the area, and by 1902, Spindletop Hill is going to produce 18 million barrels of oil a day, which is a massive amount if you consider that to the amount the Corsicana field was producing in a year was less than 1 million. With Spindletop, we now have the oil boom in Texas. Oil men are going to get very, very rich. It creates a new level category of rich people in Texas that we refer to somebody as oil rich, meaning that they're like super duper rich. We're going to start to see companies created, companies that are still around. Texaco, Gulf Oil, Exxon. These are all going to be built. There's going to be more fields drilled in Texas. Basta and then the Humble oil field and Goose Creek. And then refineries are going to be built along the Texas Gulf Coast. Stretching from Beaumont to Houston, we're going to have lots of refineries built. And so the industry is skyrocketing and growing in Texas. The drilling is going to spread west. In towns like Electra, Burke Burnett, Ranger, and Breckenridge will all have major oil strikes. And we see new inventions. Howard Hughes Sr. will invent a rotary drill bit that could break up rock and go even deeper in 1908. And so this is going to allow oil men to drill, especially like in West Texas where they have to go down further to reach it. Hughes's drill bit is going to be a revolutionary invention and still used today in the oil industry. One of the things we see, though, with the oil boom is the creation of what are called oil boom towns. When oil was struck in an area, people will rush in to make money, to work on the wells, but also to drill wells to try to get rich quick. The town populations would shoot way up. When the oil dried up, most of these people would leave and move to the next oil field. And so these towns would have brief periods of great economic success, but also other problems. There were a lot of problems with the boom towns. With that many people, the cities weren't able to handle the facilities, things like water, so the towns were usually dirty. They were very lawless. The sheriffs had a hard time dealing with the increased population, a lot of crime. robbery, murders, prostitution, stuff like that. They were crowded. The towns were unhealthy. With the oil boom is also going to create a demand for other products, one of which is lumber. The lumber industry is going to boom at this time in Texas also. It's the fourth major industry in Texas. And it's because the oil derricks needed lumber to build the derrick up for drilling for the oil. Also, they needed houses in these boom towns for the oil workers, for stores, things like that. And the Piney Woods region of Texas is going to see a boom in the lumber industry. The job of a lumberjack was hard and dangerous. And one of the things we see in these lumber towns is that the entire town would be owned by a company, what's known as a company town. And a lot of times the company didn't pay their workers in cash. They paid them in what was known as script, which was money that could be used only at the company-owned stores. And so it allowed them to use this script to buy their supplies. But if they tried to leave the town, they couldn't because their script wasn't worth anything other than in the company town. And we see several cities that are going to grow up because of oil. Houston is going to benefit greatly from oil. Houston will become the oil center for Texas and still is today. Many companies are going to set up their headquarters there, like the ones we mentioned, like Exxon, are going to have their headquarters in Houston. The refineries are in that area. And also because Houston is near the coast with the refineries, they can then ship the oil by tanker ship to anywhere in the world. As a result, Houston will build the Houston Ship Channel in 1914, where they will dig out along the Buffalo Bayou there that allows these oil ships to come in, these big ships that can carry oil anywhere in the world. Dallas will also benefit from oil, but in a different way. Dallas will become a commercial center. The railroads in the area allowed manufactured goods from all over the world to come to Dallas to be sold, so we start to see stores that are going to sell products to Texans that are going to cater to a lot of these oil people, one of which is Neiman Marcus, founded in 1907, is a department store that is going to cater to more luxury items. It's for over a century, it's sort of a symbol of luxury in Texas. Also, because of the finances in the region, Texas will get, and Dallas will house a Federal Reserve Bank starting in 1913. One of the things we see during this early 1900s is a period of immigration also. Immigration from Europe, that Germans who we've already talked about had been moving to Texas. We're going to continue to see Germans, but we get new groups. In the early 1900s, thousands of people from Czechoslovakia, thousands of Czechs are going to move to central Texas. We're going to see Italians arrive and settle in the cities. Polish immigrants are going to form communities north of Houston and south of San Antonio. And also immigrants from Greece, from Russia, from Hungary are going to come and settle in these cities. So it's going to create a very multinational culture and community, adding to the question of what does it mean to be a Texan. We're getting all these immigrants. We're also going to see a large immigration from Mexico. The Mexican Civil War, what's known as the Mexican Revolution of 1910, is going to be taking place. And large numbers of Mexicans will flee to Texas, fleeing the violence in Mexico, which will add to the population, especially in South Texas, where they will settle. And we see migration of African Americans in the early 20th century, a migration to Texas cities, moving away from rural areas to take advantage of these industries. When they do, these Texas cities are segregated. There is still racism in Texas. And so the African Americans will settle in specific neighborhoods in Houston and Dallas and San Antonio and Austin that allow them to continue a distinct African American culture. And we start to see African American owned businesses, churches, social clubs, also sports teams and colleges are going to come up. This period from 1900 to about 1920 is known as the Progressive Era in American history. The Progressive Era is a reform movement era. They specifically focus on social problems based around cities. As cities grew, with them problems like politics, corrupt politics, businesses, business regulation, not enough housing or poor housing, crime, pollution are going to go with these growing cities. And so the progressive movement seeks to solve these problems. One event in Texas plays a big change in government reform under the Progressive era with what's the Galveston hurricane of 1900. In 1900, Galveston was the most modern city in Texas and the largest seaport on the Gulf of Mexico. On September 8th, 1900, a hurricane hit Galveston. It was the largest hurricane at the time. It's still the largest natural disaster death toll in American history. Between 6,000 and 8,000 people died. We don't know exact numbers because the city was completely leveled and some of the bodies were washed out to sea. 1/3 of the city was destroyed, and thousands of people who survived the hurricane were left homeless. As a result, the city is going to say, well, we need to rebuild, let's redo our government, and they create a new type of government known as the city commission government. Instead of having one mayor who is expected to run all of the city, under the city commission, there were 5 commissioners, and each one focused on a specific area of government, and then they would be an expert in that, and they would help run it. Also, one of the things we see with the Galveston hurricane is the U.S. Army will build a 6-mile seawall that will will also raise all of the houses and pump earth under them to make it where if another hurricane comes through, they won't have the flooding or the destruction, that the seawall will slow it up. And the seawall is still there and a major attraction in Galveston today. Other reforms. Texas in 1905 will pass the Terrell election laws that required political parties to hold primary elections. Texans could elect politicians to office, but at the primary where the candidate was determined, that had been done by the political party leaders. Now, under the Terrell election laws, since the people get to elect the candidates in primaries, then they get a real say in who's going to hold office, that it's going to represent what the people want. Also, in 1914, Texas will pass a law allowing rural communities to form school districts made up of 2 or more schools, what's known as a consolidated school district. So this will help rural areas get better schools. We see other reforms in education. A law will be passed in the early 1900s that will require students ages 8 to 14 to attend school for 60 days a year. So this mandatory attendance at school that we still have starts at this time. Annie Webb Blanton is a major figure in education reform in 1918. She is elected state superintendent of education. She's the first woman elected to a statewide office in Texas, and she will pass several reforms, including free textbooks for students. Up until this time, students had to buy their own textbooks. Now the state will pay for it. Under environmental reforms, we have a movement known as conservation. Under conservation, it's the careful use of natural resources to prevent them from being lost or wasted. W. Goodrich Jones is going to lead the forest conservation movement in Texas. And as a result, in 1914, Texas creates the Texas Forestry Service, a new state department to regulate state land. One thing Texas doesn't do is a lot of regulation of business. We're not strong on business regulation. With the oil boom, Texas is going to let businesses operate without little government control. One of the big themes of the 1900 to 1920 period is women and the right to vote, what's known as the women's suffrage movement. Rebecca Henry Hayes in 1893 will found the Texas Equal Rights Association. This is the first Texas group to fight for women's suffrage. Other leaders, Annette Elizabeth and Catherine Finnegan, 3 sisters, in 1903 will found a suffrage group in Houston. Minnie Fisher Cunningham, a major leader in Texas suffrage, will run for Senate. There is some opposition to suffrage, though. Men argue that women didn't need to vote because men knew what was best and would vote to protect women. They also argued that women would be too involved in politics and would neglect their work at home. And so these are the arguments that those who were opposed to it. Thankfully, though, women's suffrage will win. Women argued that voting would make them better mothers because they could teach their kids better, and that they could teach their kids to fight for issues that helped families. Governor Jim Ferguson is going to oppose suffrage, but he's going to be impeached for corruption, for embezzling money and some other stuff. And after he's removed from office in 1917, the new governor, William P. Hobby, is going to be sympathetic to women's suffrage. In 1918, women will receive the right to vote in Texas primaries, and as a result, they will help Hobby get elected. They'll help him get elected to the Democratic primary, which at the time, if you won the Democratic primary, you were going to win the regular election. And so after he is elected, he's going to push for women to have the right to vote. And nationally, the movement is going to gain strength that in 1920, so 100 years ago, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution will be passed, which finally gave women the right to vote in the United States. The other major issue at the time is prohibition. Prohibition was the movement to ban alcoholic beverages. The Women's Christian Temperance Union was a national organization. They were very strong in Texas. In Texas, we also had the Texas Anti-Saloon League, founded in 1907. Morris Shepherd was a senator from Texas. He's known as the father of national prohibition. And in 1919, he helps get the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution passed, which the 18th Amendment outlawed alcohol. What's kind of ironic, though, is now that alcohol is illegal, several years later, federal agents will raid a ranch owned by Morris Shepherd, where they will find a still, which is a kind of the thing they used to produce whiskey, that was producing hundreds of gallons of whiskey, which he was then selling illegally to make money. So that's kind of ironic that that would happen. For African Americans during this time, we see a struggle for civil rights. The reforms of the progressive period did not really apply to African Americans in Texas. The Texas progressives ignored African Americans. One of the issues in this struggle for civil rights is voting. Because of the 15th Amendment, Texas could not legally say African Americans cannot vote. So Texas will pass several laws to try to find a way around the 15th Amendment to keep African Americans from voting. One of which is a poll tax, which is a fee you had to pay to vote. And this means if you're poor and you can't pay it, you can't vote. They also passed literacy tests that said you had to be able to read to vote. But these literacy tests for African Americans involved more than just being able to read, that they would use things like Chinese newspapers or can you tell me how many jelly beans are in this jar as a way to keep African Americans from voting. And then Texas will create what's called the white-only primary, that they can't pass a law saying African Americans can't vote in national elections because of the 15th Amendment. But Texas will say the primary is a state-run thing and we can control that. And so they will say only whites can vote in the primary. And since whoever wins the Democratic primary is going to win the election, that was a way to take away the African American vote. Texas is going to pass a bunch of laws, just like the rest of the South, that are known as Jim Crow laws. These are laws that required segregation, saying things like in public facilities like bathrooms, water fountains, public parks, beaches, swimming pools, these could be white or were white-only facilities. Jim Crow laws also said on buses and trains you had segregation. In restaurants and schools, they segregated. So you had white-only schools and African-American schools. And one of the issues that still continues is lynching. This is where white mobs would kill African-Americans if the African-American was accused of a crime, or just if they were doing something like trying to register to vote, trying to start a business. A white mob would murder the African-American without a trial, and the people who did the lynching were never found guilty of murder. A very famous incident of lynching in Texas is known as the Waco Horror of 1916, and is going to nationally help push about change for anti-lynching in the United States. What happens in the Waco Horror, Jesse Washington was accused of murdering the elderly woman on whose ranch or whose farm that he and his family worked. Jesse Washington will be arrested by the police. They will beat him and he will confess. At the time, the term they used was that Jesse Washington was feeble-minded. His IQ was below 60, which would be mentally challenged today. His trial is going to last less than an hour. The jury will take less than 4 minutes to find him guilty. After he is found guilty, the sheriff will then lead him out of the courthouse and turn him over to a mob of 15,000 people who were waiting outside, who will then lynch Jesse Washington. They will beat him with sticks and stab him. They will tie a chain around his neck and tie it to a car and drag him around town. They will then bring his body back and with the chain around it, hang it from a tree over a large bonfire that they will then slowly for several hours raise his body up and down over the fire while it burns. When it was over, fingers and toes were cut off as souvenirs, and a local photographer will take pictures and sell the postcards of the body, which at the time will be one of the largest selling postcards in the Waco area. This will attract national outrage, especially among the African American community, and will play a big role in a movement among the African American press and the NAACP to outlaw lynching. How African Americans will resist discrimination. Again, African American newspapers will come up. In Texas, we'll have several important ones. The Houston Informer, established by Charles N. Love, will be the largest African American paper in the South, and it will have a major a voice for African Americans to challenge and protest discrimination. In Dallas, you have the Dallas Express, founded by W.E. King, and these papers are going to be allowed or be able to publish stories of lynching to help people learn about the outrage to stand up against this. The NAACP is going to be founded, the national organization, in 1909. This is the major leading civil rights organization for African Americans in the country. The first chapter in Texas will be formed in Houston in 1912. By 1930, there will be 30 NAACP chapters in Texas. And the NAACP is going to legally fight against segregation. The leading institution in African American culture in Texas, though, is the African American Church. And they're going to be a social, political organization. They're going to be, besides a religious organization, they're going to help with aid for people financially and things like that, but they'll also help protest. And during this period, we see the rise of African American colleges. With segregation, we start to see colleges in Texas. The all-white colleges, or the white colleges, would not admit African Americans. So we have many private colleges started by religious groups. There's Wiley College in Marshall, Texas, Bishop College, which was also in Marshall and moved to Dallas, Paul Quinn College out of Waco, Sam Houston College out of Austin, Texas College that is in Tyler, and Jarvis Christian College in Hawkins, Texas. We also have Texas as a state will create its first public university. Prairie View A&M University is going to be created in the late 1890s as a way to keep from having to segregate the University of Texas and Texas A&M by creating Prairie View A&M. That Texas can say, well, they've created an African American college, so they don't have to integrate UT and A&M. One of the main African American figures from Texas at the time is a man by the name of Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson is a boxer from Galveston, Texas. And at the time that he was boxing, whites would not box African Americans. This is also where African Americans are segregated in baseball, in football, basketball. All these sports do not allow African Americans, especially in the South and in Texas and in the professional levels, to compete against whites. Some northern colleges, you would have a little bit of integration in football, but in these sports, especially professional sports, they are white only. African Americans were kept out from the white leagues. And so Johnson, who is one of the best boxers in the world, is going to follow the champ Tommy Burns around the country, and he's going to keep taunting Tommy Burns, saying that Burns is chicken, that he's scared, until Burns gets so angry he finally agrees to fight Johnson. And in 1908, Burns and Johnson will fight, and Johnson will beat Burns rather easily, and he will win, and he will become the first African-American heavyweight boxing champ of the world. This is going to anger a lot of whites. They didn't appreciate Johnson being the champ. They also didn't like it that Johnson led a very flashy lifestyle. He drove fast cars, dressed fancy. He was married to a white woman, which was like a really big deal. Most southern states had laws making it illegal for people of different races to marry. And he didn't bow down to white people. This is going to make African Americans absolutely loving, because Johnson is doing what they wish they could do but would probably get them killed in their communities in Texas. But whites are going to hate Johnson. As a result, they're going to get the former champ, Jim Jeffries, to come out of retirement. And on July 4th, 1910, Jeffries and Johnson will fight at what's known as the Fight of the Century. It's the first time we've used that term, the Fight of the Century. And when they fight, again, Johnson is going to absolutely destroy Jeffries. He's going to beat him very easily. And this will lead to riots throughout the South. Houston will have a large one where angry whites upset that Johnson won will attack the African American part of town and burn houses, burn businesses, and kill people because they're so upset that this African American won. As a result, the United States government even will get involved in the persecution, and they will falsely accuse Johnson of violating a law, the Mann Act, that was designed to deal with prostitution, but they said that since Johnson was married to a white woman, something illegal must be going on there. And Johnson will flee the country. He will leave the United States and go to Europe and other places because they'll find him, say, well, he's guilty without a trial, really, without him being there or presenting any evidence. And he'll be gone until 1920. In 1920, he will cut a deal with the United States government that he can return to the United States and agrees to plead guilty to the charges against him, even though he was innocent. He's tired of having to live outside the United States. And he also agrees that he will intentionally lose his next fight to a white man, so the heavyweight title, the belt, will go to a white fighter, and that he would only have to serve a small amount of jail time, and then in return, Johnson got to return to the United States. In South Texas, we have a culture clash between these immigrants, especially the immigrants from Mexico, and many of the white groups there. We've had white immigrants moving from the Great Plains region who have established farms in South Texas. There's the Mexican immigrants fleeing the Mexican Revolution. They're going to take jobs as farm laborers. We see a pattern develop, what's known as migrant labor, where the farm workers, the majority of whom are from Mexico, will move regularly to plant and harvest crops depending on what season it is. So they're migrants. They're going to move around. We're also going to see many Tejanos settle in South Texas cities like San Antonio and El Paso, which will develop a large Tejano culture and cultural identity. By 1900, over half the population of South Texas are going to be Tejanos, but they're going to face a lot of persecution and prejudice. During the Mexican Revolution, several Mexican bands will raid across the border to steal supplies to go fight the revolution in Mexico. White Texans are going to blame and fear all Tejanos for this, and we see an increase in violence against Tejanos. One of the groups that's going to increase this violence are the Texas Rangers. They're going to patrol the area to protect against bandits, but Tejano families are going to accuse the Texas Rangers of attacking innocent Tejano families. Mexican Americans are going to face the same discrimination as far as voting and segregation. The poll tax is going to discriminate against Mexican American voters. As far as schools, cities are going to create segregated schools for Mexican citizens. Abilene, Texas will do that. We'll have a segregated school for Mexican children that will last until the 1940s. One of the things, the ways, though, that the Tejanos, the Mexican American communities in Texas, will deal with this is the creation of what are known as mutualistas, which are mutual aid societies. These are going to help each other financially, help the people, the members help each other with weddings, funerals, baptisms. If someone needs help with, say, their rent or food money, the mutualistas is going to allow everyone as a group to help work together to survive. It's also going to allow a lot of the Tejanos in Texas, a lot of the Mexican American communities, to maintain their Mexican culture, which is, again, going to influence the larger Texas culture. And going back to the immigrants we talked about at the beginning of this video, add to the larger Texas culture and the question of what does it mean to be a Texan.